Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Juan's World. And normally I cook at this time, and I had in mind a recipe that I could give you for leek and mushroom pie. But I decided that I'm going to change things up a little bit. Probably give you another recipe at some point, but for now I'm going to spend more time on my philosophical ramblings because I've been slowly building towards something, and now I'm not teaching. I'm not going to be traveling because of the virus. Don't really have the ability to get out much. My books are all finished and off to the publishers. So I've got a vast tract of free time, and I'm starting to rethink what I do during the day, during the week, and I'm also going to rethink the way I do these videos. So today my topic is God, and you'll see it's God Part 1. I'm thinking there's going to be at least a Part 2, but probably a Part 3 and maybe even a Part 4, I don't know. But I want to consider the nature of God, both in terms of how people have thought about God or gods historically, and then get to how I think about God. So let's start. Now, for me, the most obvious place to start is in terms of the way people conceive God in terms of the things that they know. Genesis says that God created humans in his own image, but many philosophers and pundits, anthropologists have said it seems more likely that humans have made God in their image, or in the image of things that they understand. Now, let me be clear from the start. We can't say that humans created God. I mean, that's a possibility. But the thing is that whether God exists or does not exist is not dependent on the way humans think. That's an external reality which I'm not really going to get too much involved in. Rather, I'm just going to think about how people have written about God. And if we start with the Bible, we see lots of different images. Genesis 1 doesn't really describe God in any terms except as this all-powerful, omnipresent entity that can create suns, moon, stars, the earth, the universe, everything. And then in chapter 2, he plants a garden. And at some point in the cool of the evening, he's walking in the garden. And that's just two very, very different images of what God is. One of them, the creator, is completely outside of our experience, except possibly you might think of God as being some master craftsman or something like that, but on a colossal scale. And then the God walking in the Garden of Eden is just like Dad, just like, or a master gardener. So my first point then is that the image we have of God in the Bible, both the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Bible, is quite diverse. Let me start with the book of Job. The book of Job opens with God in his heavenly court, and he's got all of his courtiers around him. That includes angels and the Satan, the adversary, that is, in Hebrew. And the image you're really getting is the image of an emperor who is all-powerful above everything else. His rule is law, what he commands happens, and different entities, angels, archangels, whatever, are subservient to him, but are still higher than humans who are underneath it all. So we have a hierarchy with the God, emperor, at the top, and then courtiers below, and also messengers as well, who carry the messages from the emperor around his empire. And you may know your Greek, that the Greek for messenger is angelos. So angels are messengers of the God, or of the emperor. So that's one image of God that makes sense to people who live in empires. Well, in the time that both the Hebrew Bible and the Greek Bible were written, most of the time, Israel and Judah were dominated by empires. The Assyrian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. They were just small components of vast empires with the emperor at the very, very top. And chances are you would never see the emperor. You just felt his presence through the agency of his messengers, his minions of one sort or another. And that's a very natural way of conceiving of God when you live in an empire. It's not a good way to conceive of God in the modern world, because we don't really live in empires anymore. Even if you're British, we don't really live in a British empire anymore. I mean, there are economic empires, and there are powerful nations with different kinds of rulers, elected rulers. Well, that's not a good image for God. God is not elected. God is not like president of the universe or prime minister of the universe. Another way we can think of God is as a father figure. And that's also a very common image in both the Hebrew and Greek Bibles. We talk about God the Father. And in that sense, God is perhaps a closer idea of what God is to emperor. Like, the emperor is very distant, he's all powerful, you can't ever really communicate with the emperor because he's off in his faraway palace making laws or commanding armies or what have you. Whereas Father lives in your home. And Father is kind and nice and loving, but also disciplining, can get angry, and is a presence, which gives us two very, very different senses of God. I'm going to give them somewhat technical terms. The God as emperor I'm going to call transcendent, and the God as Father I'm going to call immanent. And they are very different conceptions of what God is. That if God is transcendent, that means that his power over you is absolute, and there's not an awful lot you can do. Whereas if you've got an immanent God, that means that God is kind of like not just walking around in the garden in the cool of the day, but just by your side, it's always around, always there to protect you. If you need something, you can ask, and just like with Dad, you can say, "Can I have an ice cream, Dad?" And sometimes Dad's answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. And that's how prayer works. I need a new car. Please, God, give me the money. No. Or yes. Or I'm sick. I need to get better. Help me. And again, the answer can be yes or no. That's an immanent God, a God that is right here, right now, all the time, always responding to what you ask for, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. So those are some of the ideas that the Bible presents us with when it comes to what God is. And those are both ideas that I reject for all kinds of reasons. I don't, I really don't like monarchies and empires and emperors and so forth. So I don't like the image of God as being emperor, and I don't like the idea of utter transcendence. But nor do I like the idea of God as Father, because I see that as being just inherently anthropomorphic. And it's an idea that certainly a lot of people hold dearly, because it makes God feel comfortable to them, which means it makes them feel comfortable. Like I don't have my father around always. I mean, like my father died many, many years ago. But if I have a heavenly Father, then I always have somebody to look out for me and to protect me and to help me when I'm in need. Well, I don't really want that. I wouldn't say I'm so absolutely self-sufficient and arrogant that I don't need help from anyone ever, but I don't want a spiritual father who's acting like a real father. I need something else. Now, so this is going to get us into a different direction, because we can look at all of the ways in which cultures have conceived God, and what I'm going to say is I don't like any of them. I don't like Zeus up on Mount Olympus, or his Roman counterpart Jupiter. I don't like anything that is in any sense describable in simple terms that just turn God into something that is normal and natural in my everyday world. That seems like a very, very limited, unimaginative sense of what God is. Instead, I'm going to open up an area which I will not talk about too much this time. I'll start, and then I'll get into it more next time. The anthropologist Gregory Bateson had a concept of mind that was revolutionary at the time. Now doesn't have so many followings, but at one time it was very popular, particularly in the 1960s. He was a very, very charismatic teacher. He was married to Margaret Mead at one point, and they did a lot of crazy, amazing things together. But then he also developed a kind of philosophical bent, which moved him away from direct ethnographic descriptions and anthropology in the general sense, and a higher calling towards asking how culture works, how human interaction works, and how humans interact with technology. He came up with this concept of mind. I'm just going to start you, and I'll continue on Friday. Now, intuitively, we have a rather simple concept of mind. We tend to think of individuals as having minds. So I have a mind, you have a mind, all of God's children have a mind. But we tend to think of these things as being individual properties of individuals, and particularly the properties of humans. Sometimes we might extend the idea of mind to animals, and here I'm going to delve into a little bit of etymology. Animus, which is the root for animal and animate and inanimate, is the Latin word for spirit, but we can also think of it as mind. So an animal is animate. That means it, in some sense, has a spirit or has a mind. But mostly we tend to think of mind as being the property of individuals. And what Bateson is saying is that everything has a mind, including inanimate objects, such as an axe or a pistol or a car or any technology. And this is how it works. He believes that the mind of the individual is altered when it encounters the mind of something else. Now, to some extent, we intuitively understand that when it comes to things like group action or mob behavior, where a group of people get together, for example, and they're all angry about something, protesting or whatever. And the individual minds that might make individual decisions by themselves are altered by the addition of the minds of other people around them, and so there can occur things that would not happen if the individuals were making individual decisions, but instead the group is making a group decision, not necessarily consciously, but that group may do things that every one of the individuals in the group would not decide to do alone. And so Bateson is saying that we then have a group mind. Now, where does the group mind exist? It doesn't exist in the minds of the individuals. It's a separate thing. It's outside the individuals. It's a different kind of mind. Well, that's one possibility. Another possibility is to think about a person holding a gun. The mind of that person is now different because of the gun. And Bateson's way of interpreting that is to say that the gun has a mind. And this is where you might think he and I are going off the rails. But he's saying that there is an element of mentality, of consciousness of the gun that combines with the mentality of the individual holding the gun to create a different mind, a person plus gun mind. Or we can think of a person plus axe mind, or a person plus car mind. And we can certainly recognize something to that effect if we've ever seen a person experiencing road rage. They're doing things in their car that they wouldn't do if they were not connected to the car. But Bateson is saying that there is a kind of person plus car mentality that is different from the car mentality alone and the person mentality alone. They combine to create a new mentality. Okay, well, I'll give you a couple of seconds to just absorb that for a minute, and then I'll move to something perhaps a little bit less controversial but also difficult to understand. Back in the early part of the 20th century, the concept of culture was developing in both sociology and anthropology. And the definition of culture varies considerably, but the general, intro to anthro definition is that it's those ideas, concepts, rules, written and unwritten, that guide a person so that you can say this person is English, or this person is Khmer, or this person is newer, because the culture of England or Cambodia or newer or wherever is internalized into the mind of the individuals in that culture, and so they behave according to that culture, the norms of that culture, not just language, but general behavior, opinions, activities in general. And Emil Durkheim, the sociologist, argued that there is a kind of collective consciousness that all the members of the culture share. He called it the conscience collective, which is sometimes translated as collective consciousness or sometimes as collective unconscious, because we're mostly unaware of it. Now, often people will say, well, it's human nature to blah, 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 to be greedy, to be ambitious or whatever. Well, anthropologists know that those behaviors are not human nature. They're largely driven by the culture, driven by other things too, including genetics and environmental circumstances and so forth. But they are not built in. They are learned. And the things that we learn alter our mind. We are responsive to a collective mind. And Durkheim said that that collective mind, when we are aware of it, or when we are somehow in tune with it, we have a sense that there's something larger than ourselves. There's something bigger that is, in some sense, controlling us and is independent of us. In fact, Durkheim went as far as to say that culture is independent of all individuals. It's above and outside them. And that when we perceive that higher entity, we are perceiving what we conceive of as God. All right, that's a lot to take in. So I won't go much further right now, but I'll just bring Freud into the picture for a moment, and then I'll give it a rest. In Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud was very interested in the superego, the part of our mentality that influences things like whether we feel guilt or whether we feel pride and so forth. And he believes, or believed, that the superego is the internalization of the culture, or he called it civilization. But he starts Civilization and Its Discontents by saying that people, when they experience something outside themselves, have a kind of spiritual awareness that he says is non-existent. He said that, like, some people have this feeling of oceanic awareness. And he says, well, but I don't feel it. And typical Freud, he says, if I don't feel it, then it doesn't exist. It's an illusion. And he actually wrote a book about religion called The Future of an Illusion. So there's a lot of pieces for us to be absorbing. But what I'm trying to get at, and what I'm going to talk about more in my next video, is the idea of consciousness. What is a mind? What is a group mind? What is a cultural mind? And is consciousness an aspect only of humans, or is it more widespread? And neuroscience and philosophy and physics are beginning to believe that consciousness is much, much, much wider than we have previously conceived. All right, there's my cliffhanger for today. I will wish you well, ask you to share with your friends, like and subscribe, and I'll continue with part 2 on Friday.